And we're live again with a banger new video from the LUKE-N-SHAE'S place. I'm Luke, and that's Shay over there. We got something hot for you, something very actually educational, something that we could all learn from, things that we didn't know spiritually. And I thought we'd be, since we was on a spiritual tip, we're going to stay somewhere in that vicinity. So I thought this would be an interesting video. It's on the what is it? I can't think of the guy's name now. Okay, I'm gonna have to put that down in the description. How you doing today? What's going on with you, Shay?
I'm doing good. Doing great, Luke. Ready to do another reaction today. We had a great one earlier that we did, so I'm ready to do this one.
Okay. With no further ado, oh yeah, before we get started, we need you to like, subscribe, and share. If you're enjoying our content, by all means, subscribe. Help us out. Help us in the algorithm, but also help us grow our channel.
The Bible does say in Malachi that God does hate divorce. What does the Bible say about divorce and remarriage? Remember, the Bible does say in Malachi that God does hate divorce. As a matter of fact, throughout the Old Testament, we see different laws concerning divorce. In particular, we see laws governing when a person commits adultery. God understands and knows better that the people that he's dealing with are completely unfaithful. Whether we're speaking about believers, Christians, or we're speaking about people who are not believers, people by and large tend to be unfaithful. And I want to use that word unfaithful for a reason, because I want to see if this is the true meaning of another text we're going to look at in a second. All throughout the Old Testament, we see God has his laws concerning divorce, as well as even laws concerning remarriage, even the things that may cause a divorce, such as adultery. So to be clear, divorce is a sin. As a matter of fact, to be clear, getting remarried is a sin. And even more so, that's also germane to the point, having or being in an adulterous relationship is also a sin. Why is that important? Because all three of these things seem to take place throughout the economy, from the Old Testament to the New Testament, with God's people, and even those who are not, even including people who are not believers, who happen to be married to people who are believers, Christians marrying non-Christians, Jews marrying non-Jews. Interestingly enough, God even uses this kind of imagery when speaking to the prophet Hosea and telling him to take a woman of harlotry, an adulterous woman. And the picture of this is God being married to Israel, who is an adulterous nation. And so what does he do? He even makes a statement about possibly or potentially divorcing Israel. But we see him being married to Israel, but not just Israel, but also the church. So even in adultery, God is trying to make it clear that reconciliation is of the utmost importance, and that.
See, that's what, that's one of my favorite stories, the book of Hosea. And just understanding from that aspect of, is eloquently put, that he looked at himself as God as being married to Israel, where his people reside. See? And in the process, and this is something I say almost every day with people, we constantly cheat God. We cheat on God. See, he even gave us that title. We're an adulterous nation, because we tend to do all these things against him. So when I hear people, and especially more so when I hear ladies say, well, they can't deal with the cheating. See? And he's telling you from the book of Hosea that we're constantly cheating on him. And that right there is so profound right there, because see, a lot of times people can't understand it. A lot of times I get said, because I'm a man, that I'm trying to give a man a pass. I'm not trying to give a man a pass. I'm trying to get you to have an understanding of what we are and how we are today. But I also didn't know getting married was a sin, or remarried was a sin. I had no clue. But like I said, you have anything you want to add to that, or you?
No, I'm fine.
That even if something has happened in a relationship, such as adultery, God still wants there to be reconciliation, because after all, we are the adulterous people whom God, even though he doesn't have to or probably shouldn't, out of his love still reconciles us to him. And so it should be understood that more than anything else, God would like for the two that have been joined to stay joined. But however, I said that God recognizes that we are unfaithful people. And so what happens when there has been a divorce and then that divorced couple or that divorced person wants to get remarried? Jesus says that it was never intended for a man to divorce his wife. However, he permitted it so under the old, but in the exception of infidelity. In chapter 5, verse 32 of Matthew, he says, "But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except for the reason of unchastity, which is the Greek word porneia, which is immorality, sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery. And whoever remarries or whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery also." And then the same thing is brought up again in Matthew 19:9. "And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for immorality, and marries another woman, commits adultery." So the question is, after divorce, if the person remarries, does that remarriage constitute a sin? Well, sure, it does. But the question is that remarriage, is that an act of sin, or will that be a state of sin? In other words, is this remarriage a perpetual act of sin or perpetual sin that God will hold over them forever? Or is there forgiveness and the person can live in peace as long as they have a repentant heart? In 1 Corinthians 7:8, Paul makes this statement. He says, "But I say to the unmarried and to the widows, that is good for them if they remain even as I am. But if they do not have self-control, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn it with passion." Does this include the person who is not married but has once been married? Well, let's go a little further and see. Verse 10, "But to the married I give instructions, not I, but the Lord, that the wife should not leave her husband. But if she does leave, she must remain unmarried, or else be reconciled to her husband. And the husband should not divorce his wife." Well, that part is clear. Verse 12, "But to the rest I say, not the Lord, that if any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever, and she consents to live with him, he must not divorce her. And a woman who is an unbelieving husband, and he consents to live with her, she must not send her husband away. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified through the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified through her believing husband. For otherwise your children are unclean, but now they are holy. Yet if the unbelieving one leaves, let him leave. The brother or sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God has called us to peace." So the question is going to be, what is meant here? What's the full understanding? Well, I want to enter in something that sometimes we may not consider, that I think we may want to consider. The word here for believing, for the person in the relationship, is he speaking of a unbelieving wife? The word that's used here is the word apistos, which is unfaithful or unbelieving. The question is this in reference to salvation, or is this referencing to the marriage? The reason why I used earlier the word unfaithful, because again, pistos means believe or faith. So the question is, should this be properly taken as the unfaithful person? Because the question is going to be asked, what if the person who leaves is a believer? In other words, what if the person is a professed Christian? Does that ever happen? Well, sure. Again, we see all throughout the Bible, there are people who are of the Lord who disobey and who are unfaithful. We can think of David. We can think of other people possibly in the scriptures that have made decisions that show that they are not totally faithful, but are still called God's children. Because again, that's just how we are naturally, even though the Spirit is working in us. And so is it ever possible that a Christian, a believer, could leave? Well, if that's the case, then where are the scriptures pertaining to that person? So maybe it could possibly be that 1 Corinthians 7, when it's speaking of the unbelieving, it's probably better to see this or render this as the
I found that interesting as well when he said that as a whole, being even David, and David was still considered God's children after he committed adultery. He still had relationship with God, but at the same time, like I said, he did commit adultery, and in that process, he never took us and said, well, you know what, that was too bad, and we can't reverse, or you can't fix that relationship with me. But at the same time, I thought that was profound, that he said even a Christian, even a person that's walking and rightly still can fall into this whole thing of adultery. So we're not beyond adultery. Like I said, if we don't have a strong relationship with God, it will be very hard for you not to commit these things, because you're trying to do it on your own as opposed to doing it with God. And so everything here has to be done with God. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Unfaithful, it's the same word, but the unfaithful. So now let's go back and look at this and see if that makes a little bit more sense. To the rest, I say, verse 12, not the Lord, that if any brother has a wife who is unfaithful, again, there's that word, apiston, and she consents to live with him, he must not divorce her. So in other words, so let's say if she has been unfaithful or he's been unfaithful, but she decides to stay, the Bible says that he must not divorce her. And a woman who has a unfaithful husband and he consents to live with her, in other words, they agree to stay together, he should not divorce her, or she should not divorce him in any way. For the unfaithful husband is sanctified through the wife. In other words, she's kept, set apart, kept, he or she's kept by the one that is faithful. In this case, we're speaking about a spouse who is faithful and one who is not faithful. Now, could be that we're also that it should be taken as unbelieving in terms of salvation. The reason why the different thought can be brought up in this, because again, what about a person who is a believer who has sinned? This happens. All believers are going to sin in some capacity, and God knows that we are unfaithful people, though God is himself faithful. And so maybe he's trying to show us a picture of his faithfulness compared to our unfaithfulness, and how he still desires to have this reconciliation. Now, I don't want to get into all the different reasons for why a person might divorce. Again, the Bible seems to only give an exception for those who have been unfaithful, sexually speaking, though there are those who in Matthew 5:19 think that it's only referring to someone who is in the engagement period. I don't think that's the correct application. But a person nowadays, you see that these divorces, these no-fault divorces or irreconcilable differences, those were never, ever to be an exception for someone to get a divorce. Again, if you are struggling in your marriage, first and foremost, God wants there to be reconciliation. He does not like for there to be divorce. However, if there is divorce, is there forgiveness in the Lord? Sure, there is.
He touched on that as well, which I thought was interesting, because I say that all the time, that when two people get together and the two people are together and one of the parties cheat, see, and I say this all the time, if both parties are cheating, you're going to be in trouble. That relationship, like I said, you call it, but when one person cheats, see, somebody has to not cheat to keep the marriage together. Somebody has to not do it. And then the person that's not doing it, that's the one he banks on keeping the marriage together through. Because, see, this person chose not to leave that person according to what the other person has done. See, so it's like saying, okay, well, my wife went out and she cheated on me. Okay, and my wife cheats on me, but I stay faithful. So now if I choose to stay with her, the marriage is based off the strength of me now, because that's where I was the person that didn't go outside the person, and I was the person that stayed. I thought that was interesting, and I thought the way it was well said as well.
There is. Is there forgiveness, however, if a person has been divorced and then gotten remarried? Well, what about a person who's gotten divorced, gotten remarried, gotten divorced, gotten remarried, gotten divorced, and gotten remarried? What about someone who has had multiple husbands? Well, we see Jesus literally dealing with someone and showing forgiveness and reconciliation to a woman who had multiple husbands, the woman at the well in John 4. In John 4:16, he said to her, "Go call your husband and come here." The woman answered and said to him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You have answered correctly. I have no husband." Now, in verse 16, Jesus answers the question and says, as she answers the question, she says, "I have no husband." The way she says is "uk echo andra," which is to say, "I have no husband." But Jesus' response In the English, looks the same, but the Greek is different. He says andra uk echo. He puts the word andra, husband or man, in the front, indicating that yes, husband you do not have, and the one that you're with now is not your husband. Well, what does Jesus say? Does he condemn her? No. He still wants to be reconciled to her, even though not only has she been divorced and remarried, she's been divorced, remarried, divorced, remarried, divorced, and remarried. This is a pattern in her. And so we can still see, even in this, that there is reconciliation, and God is not holding her as a perpetual sinner after reconciliation, after repentance.
You say what now?
I said I always assumed how it was preached, that sermon about the woman at the well. I always assumed that when he said, yeah, you don't have a husband, you have husbands. I assumed that it was the people that she slept with, meaning, okay, you don't have husband, you don't have a husband, you have husbands. I assumed that meant men that she actually slept with, because she sounded like she was the town, she would go to the well before the other women, and she tried to avoid the people in the town. And I assumed that she was just a promiscuous lady in the town that slept with some people's, here and there. That's how it was always taught. Like, I didn't know she kept getting divorces. That the way he's saying it, that's not how I was taught that story over my life.
That's an interesting take on it.
Because I think people interpret it that way. Like, I think they interpret it different ways.
I always took it as just like what he just said. I felt like she was, because remember back in those days, okay, you can be taken as a woman, meaning if you happen to walk, you were my maidservant, and I slept with you. Remember we read in, what was that, Revelation that time? Was it Revelation?
No, it's actually maidservants that happens in Genesis. There was plenty of people in the Bible.
No, I'm talking about
Jacob, you had Abraham, they all had maidservants
I'm talking about where it said that when you slept with the woman, you were married to her. That scripture. See, so with that being said, imagine the lady being taken all these time. And let's say I married her afterwards. And if the sheet didn't come out red, I could divorce her.
That's what I'm saying to you. That's why I said I don't think they were her husbands, because in that time, even when you were a maidservant, so, okay, go figure. So let's just say Rebecca, okay? And Rebecca, when she was married, okay, she wasn't having a child at first, okay? But then, the story of Leah, when you had Jacob, was it Jacob, who had to marry, he went to her father, which was his uncle, to go marry one of his daughters, but then he had to work 7 years. And then when he thought he was going to get the beautiful daughter that he worked all that time, which I believe it was Rebecca, he didn't get her. It was 7 years. They gave Leah. So then he had to work another 7 years to get the other sister, and in that time when they did get married, finally, and everything, when he was married to the two sisters, they both gave their maidservants, because both women were given their maidservants when they got married to him. So with the maidservants being that, I assume that the maidservants, when you think about it, virgins. So like you said, in that time, in biblical times, if the sheets didn't turn red when they were married on their marriage night or whatever the case might be, they didn't have to marry. So when I think about the woman at the well, how many men in that time are you thinking is actually going to just be marrying a woman that, just to be marrying her? That's why I was always taught in a way where I just thought she was a promiscuous woman in town, and guys were maybe hooking up with her, but nobody was marrying that woman, because she was she's had, like Jesus said, you had several husbands. I think that was a reference to say you had several partners, intimate partners. I don't think they were her husbands, because in that time they weren't. That's almost saying, okay, I know there's nothing new under the sun, but men in that time, yeah, they were getting married. They weren't just marrying this chick if she had a husband before and this husband before. That wasn't something that was being done.
But you also have to take into account that the man wouldn't know if she was a virgin until he slept with her. There's no way for him to walk up and just know. So she could have got married. If you consider every person, but if you considered every person that you slept with, see, like I said, the Bible was saying that if you slept with her, you had to pay for her or marry her. See? So that's why men had multiple wives, because they would, this is an act that would go on. And sometimes they would keep them if they could afford them. Now, with that being said, this woman could have that could have happened to her on several occasions where the man took her, but then because of that, the thing of the sheet not being read, see, he could not divorce her, but whatever they would call it, annul the marriage. But in fact, back then you had to understand, again, if you slept with a person, you were married to the person.
See,
And I
the only
remember,
reason why I say that I don't think she had repetitive husbands like that is because she seemed like she was hiding from people at the well. Okay, so she was avoiding the people in town when she would go to the well, right? So I'm thinking she was promiscuous and she knew people in town were probably whispering, gossiping about her. What I surmised from that whole thing is when you think about that, she could get stoned in that time. So I don't think she was marrying all these men. I think it was in a reference
was she
to
still
her
proven?
sleeping with a bunch of men. She was probably
No, you're proven.
the town, that kind of chick.
No,
She was
because
probably
see, but what happened here is you're looking at it from a modern time. You're not looking at it from back in that time, because in that time, again, a woman
she
wasn't
could get
able to make money.
stoned.
No,
She
but
could get stoned for
that's
that.
no. She could have got stoned for having adultery. They didn't try to stone you for if a man married you or if a man let you go. There was no stoning for that. That's what I'm saying. The men was probably taking her, and when they find out that she wasn't, and someone might have knew she wasn't and took her, and then said, well, you know what? They knew it wasn't going to come out that way. So
Yeah.
again,
Mm.
because she was already in that position. So with that being said, the man she was living with was taking care of her. So
Yeah,
that's
that's
why
what I
she was
said.
there.
That she said that that's not her husband. That's why it sounded like there was a bunch of shacking up going on, even in that time with her.
They couldn't. That's what I'm saying. They couldn't shack up. You had to have a reason for that, because see, that's why we created that. Shacking up came up in the '70s, and that's when people wouldn't get married and they were living together, and they had to come up with it because it was against the law to live with a woman in America for a long time. So you couldn't do that here neither.
Okay,
But
so
then
that's
in the
why I
'70s,
said,
that's when
and that's why
shacking
I
became
said
a
I
thing.
thought that because Jesus said to her that the one that she had at her house was not her husband. So I don't know if that meant maybe what he's saying. Maybe she had a husband before and then they left each other or something, and maybe she got with other guys. So he's saying none of those other men were your husband because that other guy. I wish somebody could explain if they had more information about that, because it's like we assume, was she married to all these men? Because Jesus is saying at the well that, okay, you haven't had one husband, you had husbands, plural. So it's kind of like, was she fast or was she just sleeping with
Shit, 'cause-
guys in town? Was she actually married to these people? So that's interesting.
hold on, let me see what he said here.
This is a pattern in her. And so we can still see even in this that there is reconciliation, and God is not holding her. Not only has she been divorced and remarried, she's been divorced, remarried, divorced, remarried, divorced, and remarried. This is a pattern in her. And so we can still see even in this that there is reconciliation, and God is not.
Even he said it. She was divorced, remarried, divorced, remarried. So I was thinking, like I said, if we're looking at it from the aspect of when a man slept with you, you were married. See, you couldn't. That was kind of like, unless you was working as I'm sure a prostitute, then I could understand that side of it. But at this point in time, he just said she was married, unmarried, remarried, and so that whole process. So none of the men there was a husband. So maybe Jesus was saying the one that you originally married is your husband, but neither one of the guys that you're talking about was them. You ever thought about it that way?
I just said that before you played it. I said, well, maybe she had a husband at first, and then he's counting that guy as her husband, and all the other extra ones weren't her husband. That could be another
Because
way to look at it.
under
Yeah.
under the law of you couldn't remarry, see,
Yeah.
unless the husband was gone. So yeah, I
True.
could see it that way as well. Well, you was absolutely right if that's what
But
you said.
how often, even in that time, when you think about biblical times, you never read about any stories really where the husbands were leaving their wife, except for if it was death or something like that.
Yeah,
So
but that's what I'm saying. Men didn't leave their wives in that sense.
Yeah,
But
that's why I'm like, how I didn't really hear about divorce in the Bible.
but that's but that's the point I'm making. The man that took her virginity was her husband. All the men she married after that, meaning they might have got divorced under the wrong rules, like the Bible is saying you're not supposed to get divorced. See?
Yeah,
And you're not supposed to remarry. Or so if it's saying you're not supposed to get divorced and you're not supposed to remarry, that those two things are sin. So
yeah,
anything she did from the man, the first man she had, again, would not be her husband. Because the
yeah.
original man that took her virginity
Took her
was
virginity.
her husband.
See, that's the key term, what you just said, took her virginity. And that's what I was saying at first. When Jesus seen her at the well, maybe what he was referring to was the people she was intimate with.
Not holding her as a
Yet, but see, like I
Because
just
you know
said,
how it says you become one. Two people become one. Maybe he was
but
saying that, okay,
no, he
you
was
became
saying,
one with quite a few guys in town. So yeah, you
no,
don't just have one
he was,
husband.
no, he was saying, just like we got today, and we're looking at it today, people get married and unmarried. See, but what the word is saying is the man that took your virginity, the first man that you married, the one that you legally married, the first one, that's your husband. Now you might have divorced the first guy and got with the next guy, but the law says you can't do it. So the second guy is not your husband. See?
Yeah.
Now she divorced that guy. Like we had the girl one day that was on the podcast, one that she was we did the podcast on where the girl divorced the guy, then she was pregnant with another guy, and she got divorced from her first husband. So what the Bible is saying, she's still married to the first husband.
Yes.
Because you can't get a divorce from the first husband.
Yeah.
See?
And
Now,
yeah.
if you marry anybody after that, you can marry 4 more people after that. But those marriages wouldn't count because, see, by the word, the first man is your husband.
Is your husband. Yeah.
So
That's why
she
it's
said
hard
the
for
man
me
that she,
to it's hard for me to understand it when it comes to the woman at the well being that in that time. In biblical
no,
times,
that's,
you didn't hear about women. Women were barely allowed to do anything in the time. Okay. So I can't
but they
see this
divorced her.
woman who's just around a regular town woman. She was hiding from the people in town. It's like they knew who she was. They knew her
But
title. She was a
no,
promiscuous woman.
but see,
So
like I
they
said,
didn't
you're reading.
allow women to just go getting divorces like that. You had to answer to somebody
She
higher for
didn't
that
get
to
it.
happen.
That's what they're saying. She couldn't get a divorce. The man had to release her. And the law says the man cannot release her.
So
See?
yeah,
And if she married anybody else, them marriages was null and void. So the man that she was married to now, she knew the law. So when Jesus asked her the law, she knew the law. So she said, the one that's in the house now is not my husband. Because the one that took my virginity, that's not him.
yeah.
She knew the law.
True. Yeah, that's interesting. I wish I had more research on that whole thing because everybody I've heard it different ways on how people view that whole thing on how that woman was. So they always paint her as
Yeah.
a promiscuous town woman. So
But see, that's what I'm saying to you at this point in time. See, we equate a lot of stuff that we have today to back then, and it was entirely different because they didn't do everything. They say everything has been done before, has been done.
yeah, there's
Everything
nothing
under
new
the sun
under the
has been
sun.
done.
You had
But,
prostitutes back then. So
but
that's
just what
you
I'm
had
saying. But it's clear she's not a prostitute. See, it's clear that she's a woman that, okay, again, if she wasn't allowed to work and make money, how would she take care of herself? So she then began, like I said, other men, well, maybe this particular brother that was with her was taking care of her.
but see that what I can't
Not
run
that
from the fact that think about what you're saying. If she was not a
perpetual
promiscuous
sinner
woman in town, hold
after
on before you play
reconciliation.
it, Luke, because I'm saying something. If she was not promiscuous and if they didn't paint her as like a town prostitute or whatever the case might be, why would she need to hide from the townspeople? It says in the
she
Bible
wasn't hiding.
she
She
actually
wasn't
would
hiding.
go to the well to avoid the people in town. She would go at certain times to avoid the people in town. So that tells
Again,
me that she knew people were talking about her and looking at her a
because
certain way.
okay, because again, At this point in time, if you got married, when they knew the law, you were ousted. That was the wrong thing. See, that would have been equivalent to being out there like that. But at the same time, the law was there. They knew the law. She knew the law. She knew that she could not marry these men afterwards because she was aware of the law. And she was embarrassed of the many times she got married, which we don't have today, where people are not embarrassed by what they do. See, they're not ashamed of what they do. So she was ashamed that she was married all these many times. And the first one that she had, let her go. Because see, back then, a woman couldn't divorce anybody. The man has to give a written divorce. So that's what I'm saying to you. It wasn't she got up and left. It wasn't like she was in today's time where you got the option. That's what he was saying. There was no fault divorce back then. It was none of that. So back then, remember the reason he gave us the reason for divorce, he said because the men's hearts were hardened.
Okay.
That was the only reason he gave you an option for divorce.
Yeah.
And so if they lived under the law and knew she couldn't get a divorce, then okay, see, there you go. So she knew the man that first slept with her was her husband, but he put her out. So she had to go. She couldn't stay with when she got put out. The law was saying he was supposed to keep her, but he didn't. He put her out. So she had to find other means of living. Just like we looked at Ruth. She had to find other means of making a living.
So maybe that's how, like you said, maybe that's how if one of her first husband released her, yeah, if she wasn't able to work, then that's how she was probably getting men to pay for her. I don't know. Wow, that's interesting. Yeah.
That was
after repentance. And so what does she do? She understands who he is. As a matter of fact, goes and tells other people in her town, in her village, and they come back to him as well. So it should be clear that reconciliation with God is possible for anyone. Divorce is not a perpetual sin, nor is remarriage a perpetual sin. Should a person get divorced? Absolutely not. Should a person get remarried? Absolutely not. But if they do, it is a sin. But if they do, then what? Should that person who is remarried get divorced from the person they're remarried? Well, again, God still does hate divorce, even the second divorce or the third divorce. You don't compound a sin, try to rectify it by doing another sin, which is getting divorced again. Remember, there is no command in the scriptures where God tells a remarried person to get a divorce. As a matter of fact, the Bible doesn't even explicitly say that God hates remarriage.
You say what?
I was saying hello to the person in the chat, Furby guy. Oh. They said hello. Okay. I was saying hello back.
Oh, okay. Well, my bad.
But yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, so when you think about that in those times of divorces, I guess that might have been a thing, because if they were released by their husband, and I read plenty of scripture where they had multiple wives, and they also had relationships with the maidservants that their wives had. So if that's the case, then if she was divorced, or if the husband released her, how is she going to have means of income, like you said? If we take the story of Ruth and Naomi, okay, when their husbands died and Ruth followed Naomi to her homeland, right? And she didn't have a husband because her husband passed away. So she would go in the field and she would pick up, whatever fell in what's his name? Oh my goodness. Ruth and Boaz. She would go to Boaz's field and pick up the different things that they dropped as they were harvesting in his field. Well, she would pick that up and take it back to Naomi, and that's how they would eat and everything. But by the grace of God, he ended up marrying her. But at that time, she didn't have a husband, neither did Naomi. Their husbands passed away. So when you didn't have a husband, and if you didn't have your virginity, I could see where, that you're out in the dark. You're pretty much, I could see where you would try to find another husband and hope that he didn't care that the sheets didn't turn red, because how else are you going to survive at that time?
But that's what I was trying to allocate there, because that's what it sounded like. She was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the first man let her go, but knowing the law, and he wasn't supposed to do it, because they didn't have no fault divorce back then. They didn't have that, okay, well, I'm not happy, I can go. You couldn't do that. No woman can do that. So that
Yeah.
was the whole process. But that's what made it interesting, though.
Okay. And you want to read the chats, or you want me to read it? Looks like we have some comments in the chat.
Oh, that's interesting. Is it Furby guy? And hey, because he was speaking to you. Well, if the marriage is horrible or if it doesn't work out, I say they should divorce.
Well, see, some people think that people should divorce if it's not working out. And my whole thing with that, because I know the Bible's saying if there is basically, if there's sexual immorality, okay, so if there's, let's just say layman's term, adultery, if they're cheating in the marriage, then that's, God knew that was going to be a thing. So, but he frowns upon divorce. So this is my question too, because there's so many things that can happen in a marriage. And I get God, God gave us guidelines to stay in a marriage. That's why you have to be equally yoked and everything. But say in an instance where I know this has happened in life, say that somebody marries, but they don't realize until they're in that marriage that they have an abusive partner. Then what? Are you supposed to stay with someone who is actually harming you physically?
Well, I'm assuming God still say he hate divorce, and that there could be reconciliation, but that's been said. So again, like I just said, that's why we have to be careful. I state that all the time. You got to be careful who you marry.
Yeah, but sometimes people don't come out. Listen, sometimes people hit a certain point in their life where they could have depression. They can have different things that happen over time. That person might not have been like that from the beginning for years. What if one day, this person just decides, and this has happened. I've heard plenty of stories where it was years later where somebody decided to start throwing hands in their marriage. Okay, so then what is the person supposed to do if they're in danger? That's a dangerous situation.
See, that's the point. I just registered again, having an understanding, because see, now that we're dating in this day and age, we can't jump into things as quickly, okay? Because if the person is not there and the person doesn't have a relationship with God, see, that's what I stated to you that day. Kept saying, it's not the credit score, it's the relationship with God. Don't go there looking at the man's shoes, the money, how he look. Go look at that man's Bible. If that man's Bible is well read,
I have to comment on that because I would go with that. And listen, I wholeheartedly, I trust God. I believe God. Yes. And I do understand that you're supposed to be equally yoked. But sometimes you can look at a person's Bible and you don't see the devil behind them. And I've had a family member in my life. I know for a fact that they were really into the person because they were into the Bible. The person, they were they were a godly man. If anybody on the outside would look at this person was always in church. This person did everything that you would think, oh my goodness, he's going to be a great husband or boyfriend. Well, my family member ended up with that person and he turned out to be abusive. Sometimes, Luke, it doesn't matter. You can be with somebody and date somebody for years and that doesn't come out. But when you say I do sometimes, you're saying I do to be in the corner in fear because sometimes that comes out later on. So yeah, I've seen it happen.
What I reiterated, and I said this earlier, I said this part before. I said today's time, since we're not marrying virgins and we're marrying people who have already been done these things. So I'm gonna look at your Bible. I stated before that your relationship with God. That relationship with God. If I hang around you, I'm gonna notice whether or not your relationship with God is real. And so, just like in all things that we do in life, see, everybody has red flags. You see them. And if you avoid the red flags, there's things that happen that you notice and you know is wrong, but you continue on. So I'm saying, okay, that is the combination of both of these things. If you got a relationship with God and I see that your Bible is well read and you are living in that, I see where you really believe that word. I see that every day when I'm talking to you, when I'm courting you. I'm watching what you do. I'm watching how you do it. But so many times I've heard people who got in relationships and then see red flags, but then avoid the red flags
And they
because they
go
want
right
the
past the
person.
red flags. Yeah.
And so, yeah, you can have a well-read Bible and still be a messed up person. But if
True.
that's all I see, then that's where you got sucked in at. But it's a
Yeah.
combination of I need to be watching everything. I'm not going to go into it and go, okay, well, he got a well-read Bible. That would be, or she got a
Well,
well-read
I'm
Bible.
not saying,
That's going to
yeah,
make
the
her fine.
person was going to church and everything. They were doing, I guess it was a whole, like I said, there's
So if she
people that
never
can
dated
put on a
him,
whole show, and it's sad. You can, within time, people are so good at their hiding things. That's what I'm saying. But yeah, you do have
but
to look for
that's what
things.
I'm saying. Anybody that does those things, that's my point. I feel like even at our best, when we were doing things in the wrong way, see, there still was red flags. I'm a man that was doing things in the wrong way as a teenager, but there was still things that I could not hide that you saw. Now, if you stayed, that was on you, but
Okay.
there was things you cannot hide. That's what I'm saying. So
Yeah.
I'm assuming they didn't date prior to getting married. Because see, if I hung around you, I'm gonna notice some things about you.
Who
Because you
didn't
can't
date?
keep
Who didn't?
the people that you're talking about.
Oh yeah. She definitely dated
See?
him for a couple of years. Yeah, she did actually.
And she had to see
That
some
was her
things
first her first
that didn't measure up.
yeah, she hung around him and everything. That she was around his family and everything. So that's something that I'm saying it can happen. And then they eventually got married, and that's when
Okay.
I don't want to say all hell broke loose, but that's what happened. But can we read the chat though?
Okay, go
That's why
ahead.
I said I know divorce, when we say okay for adultery, that's why I said what about for an abusive marriage, and I don't see that in the Bible, but I'm like, God, there's some people that are really
See, 'cause-
struggling in their
no,
abusive
I,
marriages.
I think you see it. I don't think you want to accept it because he's saying he hate divorce. And that's why he's telling you don't marry somebody of uneven yoke. See, the Bible is a plan. The plan is there. And you have to
Yeah.
follow the plan to a T. See, now if you don't follow the plan and get yourself in a mess, okay, he still hates divorce.
Yeah, okay. Can we read the chat because it looks like we
Go
have a
ahead.
lot.
I said go ahead.
Okay,
I was
so after the other comment and hey, when I said hello, for something we said, Furby Guy said, that's interesting. Also, Furby Guy said, that is why I love these channels. I love seeing other people's perspectives. Thank you for commenting, Furby Guy. And Furby Guy also said, love isn't about anything other than the person who is really special, but you got to be careful who you marry. Yeah, I do agree. You got to be careful who you marry. That's true. And Luke, you were just saying that.
yeah, that's the key. Because you can't just go out here marrying people just because. See?
Yes.
But there's a plan. He gave a plan, and in that plan, you should follow that plan. But that way you avoid
Marriage.
those things.
Is that remarriage a sin if it's done in the wrong way? Sure. But what does God want you to do? To be at peace and to continue in the order of being reconciled to him. That's first and foremost. Now, if a person's not reconciled to him, it doesn't matter if they're divorced, remarried, or any other sin, because that sin is preeminent. That is, that you have not placed your faith in Christ and been reconciled to him. Everything else pales in comparison. But if a person is, and they've fallen, they've had struggles, they've sinned, what have you, but they are at a moment in time where they want to be reconciled, well, then amen. God still grants that. And we look at that in Deuteronomy 4 as we look at some of these provisions when the person has a divorce, but then about a person being remarried, God literally gives instructions on how to remarry in Deuteronomy 4 and the way it should be done and how the person should be treated. So is that to say, though, that God is for a person getting divorced if they can handle whatever's happening in the marriage? No. To get a divorce and then get remarried, that's not what I'm saying, and that's not what God is saying. However, if this has happened, first and foremost, be reconciled to God. Whatever state that you're in, whether you are single, whether you are married, whether you have been divorced and remarried, be
Well,
reconciled to God and live in a way that is fitting for him, that brings him
can
glory.
I comment on
I
that
do not
real
believe
quick?
that particular sin is a
So,
perpetual sin. I believe that it was an act of sin.
So what he said is very interesting, and just in, like I said, praying on learning, knowing more truths. Okay, that's something that I constantly pray for God to open my eyes for understanding and things that, you know, sometimes preaching and different things where I need to understand. And as I'm getting an understanding more and more, there's a pastor that I like to listen to when I'm in my search for truth, where he speaks on marriage. And I recently just heard this where I wasn't aware of that either, that, you know, the remarrying or marrying someone who was divorced prior to you, that whole thing. And when he preaches this to his congregation, there has been people that didn't know that and actually have went to their wife or their husband and say, hey, you're my second husband. I actually didn't divorce my first husband or my first wife because of what God is saying I could divorce him for. So they
Yeah,
were
the wrong way.
actually ending it with their second marriage and trying to reconcile with their first marriage because they're like, wait, I didn't know this was a thing. Whether it was feelings, why they got divorced. Oh, we had different differences after so many years. There were people actually saying, hey, I got to end my second marriage because I don't want to send my soul to hell. And when you think about that, I didn't know that until recently, because you see people get divorced, but then I didn't know that. Okay, so if I go marry somebody that was divorced, is that okay? Okay, and I had to do my research with that because I was in a situation where I was married. Then I thought about it. I'm like, wait a minute, but she was married before you, so you technically wasn't her first husband. So you had to kind of do the math with these things because you don't want to put yourself in a
Well,
situation.
see, that's what I'm saying. But was she married prior to
That's the
that
thing.
marriage?
Oh
Was she
no,
married, or she just, are we basing it off of her having sex with
no,
him?
I'm talking about
Was she
the
actually married?
pastor who was preaching this. But then I
Uh
actually had
huh.
to do the math too with my relationship, and I'm like, wait a minute, because you know you got people that were married before, but then after thinking about it, you have to do the math. Like, okay, you were married before, but the wife you had was actually married to someone else, so she had a first husband. So you technically wasn't her first husband, so you're good to go. You have to kind of do your math, like, okay, how many times was your wife married before you, kind of thing, because it does suck that you're now learning this now, and you have to make sure that you're not marrying somebody else's husband because their divorce might not have been
But see,
okay in the eyes of God.
it still would be based off of, okay, again, was the person married, the first person that the one she was married to prior to the I don't want to guess the man, was, did she leave because of cheating? Because if she was
Oh,
leaving
when I
because
was
of
talking
cheating,
about when I
infidelity,
was talking
yeah,
about the pastor and his wife. So when I was talking about that, not the pastor and his wife, but the pastor and his congregation, there were people in his congregation that when he preached that, they felt convicted and they were like, wait a minute, I got a divorce just because we had differences some years later. So it wasn't for adultery. It wasn't for any of that. So a lot of people were like, wait a minute, I have to end it with my second marriage because in the eyes of God, this is not even a marriage.
oh, okay, well, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
But what you were just
But in a
saying,
state
for
of
me,
sin,
when I
because
was
that would
doing my
mean
math, I don't know that whole situation. All I know in the relationship that I had, there was a marriage before me, but then when you looked at the woman, the ex-wife, she was married to somebody else before him. So it's like, okay, you're on like your second husband, so that doesn't count because your first husband, who knows why they were divorced and whatever
That's what
that.
I'm saying. But if she left for the right reasons, she can. It wasn't saying that she couldn't. See, she could have left for the right reason. If it was adultery, she got rights to leave. He got rights to stay, but she got rights to leave.
Well,
If
she
that
didn't
was the
leave her
case.
second husband. She didn't leave her second husband for adultery. So I just assumed that she wasn't leaving people for adultery. She just seemed like she
But,
got bored with her husbands and moved on. That's what it sounded like.
okay, but that's what I'm saying. But that's called speculation. So I
Well,
don't,
I'm
like I said,
going by what the men were saying. Both men, I actually talked to both men, and they both husbands said, "Oh no, she just up and she just seemed like she might have had friends at work that yeah, kind of that kind of thing." They both were saying the same thing. So who knows?
okay. Well, let's let this end and that we can wrap
That the
this up.
blood that cleanses us, the cross that reconciles us, is of no effect to people who have been remarried. So I hope this helps those. Again, many
Can we
people have
read the
been
rest of the
divorced.
chats? It looks
Unfortunately,
like we had more
many people
comments in
have
the
been
chat.
remarried. The Bible is clear, though, that he loves each and every one of those individuals, and his only goal is to see us all reconciled to him. Amen.
That was interesting. So, divorce only if there's adultery in your marriage, because if not, then, and there's a lot of people getting divorced for, I don't know if it's even, some people just grow apart. So, is this the new comment? Let me see. If you get divorced, you shouldn't remarry them because it wasn't healthy in the first place. So, I can understand that, but some people actually, I've seen people actually go back and remarry the person they divorced. Let me see. In fact, everything we see could be real or it can't. A lot is an illusion depending on how you see it. Interesting. Thank you
But
so
yeah,
much for commenting in the chat, Furby guy. People give up so easily. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that today. A lot of people give up easily. Marriage is almost like the new girlfriend boyfriend. It's like, okay, when you want to break up, just break
well,
up
see,
and
that's what,
game.
and that's exactly what he was touching on, because see, that's what people had started doing. They was keeping it within the law. They were marrying, but see, they wasn't holding on to the wife or the husband. Well, in that case, the husband wasn't holding on to the wife. So with that being said, that was the issue. You could end up marrying a bunch of people. The woman could end up with a bunch of men because the men was going, okay, well, I want to go. And so that's why when he said Moses gave that law under the impression that men's hearts were hardened. So that's why he gave it. Because see, it would be like, okay, well, I got this girl, I got the girl, so now I think she's too old. It's time for me to get a new girl. And that's what the people were doing. I can go
Yeah,
get me a new girl now. I want a new girl.
that's,
Because there was
yeah.
no laws that governed how many people I could marry or when I could marry. And so that's when laws had to be put in place. And God was telling you from day one that he hates divorce. So that's why it's important to take marriage serious and marry the person that is right for you. That's
Yeah.
evenly yoked. You, like you said, well, if the man beating you, well, see, that's the issue. You didn't take the time, the effort to seek out that person before all of this happened. You might have married him because you thought he was cute. You might have married him or her because you thought they were fine or you thought they were good people. Again, we have to watch. You have to be around the person. I'm not going to just sit around you in church. I'm going to watch you at home. I'm going to watch you how you deal with other people. I'm going to look how you deal with your children. You're going to watch
Yeah.
all of this with that person before you jump out there and say, I'm ready to marry that person.
Yeah, so
That's
what
what we
I'm
see.
hearing
So
is
properly
we got
vet
to
those things.
stop getting married so quickly because I know people say, "Oh, I fell in love and we were married in the next month after we met," and I'm like, "Is that sounds like it?" But then some of these people, their marriages last for 50 plus years. Okay, my parents were an example. He met her on a Saturday. My father met my mother on a Saturday. He proposed to her that Tuesday, and 2 weeks later they were married, and they were married close to some almost 60 years. So, it looks like we have another chat real quick. I just wanted to read this Furby guy. If you truly love someone, you would be willing to put up with their BS. Okay, so that I can you're gonna take some things. In other words, you love that person, you're gonna ride hard for them. You're not gonna just try to cancel them for
But see,
everything.
no, but that's
Nowadays,
kind
oh my
of,
goodness, you hurt my feelings. And it's like, no, that's not a marriage. That's not.
no, because like I said, because they gave you the right to divorce. And then when they put that in there, see, like I said, holy matrimony is God. That's why God is saying he hate divorce. So it wasn't easy to get a divorce back in the day. You couldn't just get a divorce back in the day like you're doing today. Like, oh, I'm not happy, so I want to go my own way.
And you know
This is
something
what
that,
we're saying. So that's
yeah,
why we say it today. So, and when you hear me say there's nothing in it for men, and it makes you upset when I say that, see, because you can lose easily today.
well, see,
You
I
can lose
wasn't
because you
gonna
ain't got no
get into
control
all
over it.
that because we'll be on here all night if we do that.
But like I said,
We'll
we're
save
gonna
that for
wrap this
another
up.
day because that's a matter of
Oh no, I
opinion.
wasn't going into it, but I was just
But
saying that's why we in that
when
state
you
of
say
mind today.
that, that's promoting fear. Oh, there's nothing in for men. That let's have that for. That's why I wanted to do that other reaction, because it touches on that what you just said. But I want to say something though, toward that. I am so glad. Okay, there's a song called "Not Like Me." I'm so glad that the God I serve is not like us, because can you imagine if we were canceled? If he, oh wow, you woke up, you didn't even thank me for waking you up this morning, and you know what? I'm just over you. You're just out of. I'm writing you out of the good book. I'm not.
Well,
No,
that's what I've been
the book of
preaching to
life.
y'all for
Can you
years.
imagine if that's how God was? And this is how we are as people. We're so quick to end things. And I'm so glad that he gives grace, because oh my goodness, if he was like us,
But
and
we
that's
got,
why he tries to give examples of how much he loves us and how much grace he gives us. He gives examples
but
for
we
that.
got, but yeah, I hear you. But we got to wrap this up. We
Can you read the
rounding up on
last
two.
chat? Read the last chat, and then we can wrap it up,
Well,
because
no,
I appreciate Furby Guy's comments
well,
tonight. Can you see it?
if you wanted to go on your own way, never get married in the first place.
Okay.
But that's what I'm saying. Well, that's where that part came in, where we say there's nothing in it for a man, because when you gave that woman the right to divorce me for whatever reason, she can leave and take half my stuff. It used to be a time I had to do that. So that's what we're saying. We don't have no power over that. But like
See
I
you,
said,
Furby
you go from
Guy.
there.
Thank you so much for commenting.
And thank you for Furby Guy for being in there.
Yes.
He stuck through the whole show. It's an hour show. But like I said, go ahead and hit the your line, because we had to end the stream there.
Yes. So thank you so much for those who joined us. If you like our content, please like it. Puts us in the algorithm. Share it with your family and friends, because that helps grow our podcast, and we're trying to do that. And by all means, subscribe. That's the main thing that we really need you to do, because when you subscribe, it really grows our podcast. It's absolutely free. And don't forget to click the notification so that you get alerts when we're going live and we're posting content. And at Luke-N-SHAE'S Place, a positive mentality is a destined reality. Your mental health is important. Wear your smile, stay positive. And Furby Guy, I'm going to read your last comment. Fair, have a good night. And I already subscribed. Thank you so much for subscribing. And
You
we
guys
are going to bring you some great content. Thank you for being a subscriber, and join us next time.
have a blessed night.